Well, today I'm speaking with Susan Wilson. She is a certified nurse midwife and she's an expert in menopause. She's been working with women for over 40 years. And today we're talking about how menopause can be the experience that we want it to be. We're not at the whim of what's happening to our bodies, and that we can actually create a great experience through this time of our life. So enjoy. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast for this week. This week, my special guest is a certified nurse midwife and an expert in menopause. So please help me welcome Susan Wilson to the podcast this week. How are you, Susan?
Well, glad to be here.
I'm so happy to be talking to you today because, myself and many of the women that I know listen to this podcast is going through the menopausal time of our lives. And what I loved about when I visited your website is that the question that you ask first and foremost when you arrive there is, what kind of menopause do you want to experience? So my first question to you is we have a choice.
Yes, I think in many ways we do. And that's one of the things that I'm trying to reframe, is that the way Western culture looks at menopause, this is something that happens to you. And it's something that you're going to experience. It's going to be a wild ride. Get ready for it. And that's not really the way it is. I mean, menopause is a very natural part of the biological arc of a woman's life. And what I've done in this book is try to fit it in to that natural arc, because we've gone through many hormonal changes in our lives. We go through puberty, although when we're going through puberty, we often don't have the capacity to really stand back and look at it and understand what's happening. But many women have also gone through pregnancy. There's no doubt in your mind when you're pregnant that your body doesn't belong to you and something really big is happening. The same thing with menopause. And I like to remind women, you've got this, you've done this before. So let's look at how it was for you before, how you coped, how you handled things. And I also like to connect the dots for people, help them to connect them themselves, that our earliest experiences really do shape how we experience menopause. So much of the work that I do with women has to do with going back and following the breadcrumbs of their lives to how their identity of a woman was formed, what kind of messages they got earlier in their life about their sexuality or what it was to be a woman, and begin to integrate these things because they all do affect it quite a bit.
Ooh, okay. Let's go there. Because I've never heard that before. What our earlier programming was, or how we were brought up, or what our environment was, how much that can affect our experience of menopause. Mm-hmm. So, what are some of those influencing factors?
Well, you can take it, believe it or not, all the way back to the womb, because the level of stress that our mother is experiencing when we're in the belly affects the way our brain gets wired to handle stress. And stress is a critical factor when you get into menopause, because it can derail the whole mechanism our body has in place for handing over hormone production. Our ovaries begin to wind down. They want to hand over that hormone production to our adrenal glands, which are very connected to how we experience stress. And so if we arrive at menopause really stressed, which most women do, because we just keep adding one more thing to our plate all the time and adapt to it.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay, sorry.
No, I'm being sarcastic.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so, the whole mechanism that's supposed to take over hormone production is generally overstressed itself, and there's nothing there to catch the ball. And so that's why menopause is much more difficult for women than it needs to be. I've had women so often say to me, how does just missing 1 or 2 periods, everything was going fine. Yes, I'm stressed, but I've been doing what I always do. I've always coped. And now I miss a couple of periods, and all of a sudden I'm having hot flashes and night sweats, and I can't sleep anymore, and my hair is falling out, and I'm gaining weight. How can just missing a couple of periods cause all that? And the answer is that it doesn't. It's not just missing a couple of periods, but it's that whole thing that was supposed to be there to catch the ball isn't there. And
Right.
so then we need to step back and try and help the body recover itself.
Right. So that makes a lot of sense, because if we are in stress, I mean, every function of our body is, challenging. But you also mentioned, how we see ourselves as a woman can influence our experience of menopause. So what does that look like?
So when you think about it, so many things go into that. And in this generation, there's been a big dollop of culture and social media and the way things are reflected to us. And if we are becoming a woman and all of the messages we get about that from our parents, our fathers, the teenage boys that we, engage with that are insecure themselves, we often are a little wobbly there. And add to that the fact that the image of beauty in our culture is a 16-year-old who's stick thin, and maybe 3% of women have that kind of body. Most women don't, so there's shame involved with that. And then you come to menopause, and the medical culture and the popular culture is telling you your life is over, your role as a woman is done, and all of that shame that has been under the surface is really perpetrated again with body changes and changes to our physicality in other ways. And so it's very helpful to go back and really understand, like, whose voices went into creating our image of who we are, because quite often it's reflections from other places and not what we know to be true about ourselves. So there's no better time than to go in and dive deep than menopause.
I know I've been very grateful because, I'm just about to turn 53, actually. And I have finally got to a place of acceptance with my body. And I'm going through menopause. So
good.
and I know that if I'm putting on weight or different things that that I'm proactive and I'm not looking at outside things to blame for that. I'm like, okay, well, what can I actively do that's going to help help and get my weight back on track and my health back on track? I spent a lot of my 30s just agonizing over my body, and of course now at 53 I wish I had that body.
I do know.
Why did I waste all that time? And again, if I look at my programming, I remember, like, I was always an athlete, and I was always thin when I was a kid. I was a roast instructor in my 20s, so I always had a good physique. And I'm like, I was never told that I was overweight or anything like that. So I'm like, why do I have this angst about my body? What is this? And I remember thinking that and going home and seeing my parents, and my mum was like, I saw such and such the other day that you went to school with. She's put on quite a bit of weight. And I went, that's where I get it from. Because my mum, and again, it's not like she was saying anything of malice. That was just something that that was a value of hers that she measured other people by. But I'm like, oh, I see now. Yeah, that's where they came from.
And sadly, our whole culture measures people by that value. So that makes it that much more difficult. But in the same ways that, our bodies are amazing thing. They're just one of the most, to me, I'm in awe of them. And they have such intelligence, and they're always working toward health. And in the same way that you're talking about that, I like to help women see, like, what those symptoms mean, what their bodies are trying to do so that they can then find a way of stepping in and helping their body do that.
Yes.
So that gives a measure of control back, whether it be the weight or whether it be hot flashes or something else. Their body's really trying to get somewhere. And if you have the attitude that menopause is happening to you, it's very different than if you see, oh, this is what my body's trying to accomplish, and I can get on board and help here.
All right. So what is our body trying to accomplish? What is the purpose of menopause?
Menopause, it does end the reproductive cycle, but the brain is getting rewired for the next phase. And the estrogen that's highest when we're in our reproductive years, the estradiol, that really puts us in a hypnotic trance that allows us to nurture everything in sight, take care of our families at our own expense, kind of be the doormat, if you will, for raising children and families and not attending to our own creative needs. So when we get to menopause, the brain is being rewired because estradiol goes down and another estrogen rises, estriol, and that hits the creative centers of our brain. So at menopause, we're being stimulated to become more creative, to be able to synthesize and integrate what we found and really become evolutionary agents for the species. There's something out there these days that they call the grandmother hypothesis. They're starting to look back, in sociology and anthropology and see that once we lived long enough to become grandmothers, we really evolved the species because they could gather more food. They could take care of the children that the younger women who were now pregnant with another baby and their resources needed to go toward that baby. They could take care of these children, help raise them. They had the long views. So they kind of held the history of their tribe in a way, and they could begin to give this to younger generations. And there's only one other species that I know of that's a mammal that lives past menopause, and these are a couple of the whale species, and they really take the same role on in their pod. If food is scarce, they remember where the old hunting grounds are, and they can take the pod there. So it seems to be programmed in there.
I know I have an incredible amount of women through my Mind Movies company and through my, the coaching and things I do through that business, of women who are this age who are like, okay, I've done the hard yards. I've been the mother, the wife, the carer, all of that. Now it's like, I feel like it's time for me. So what can I do to contribute? And, and now they're looking at ways that they can step into that, at this time in their lives, which I think is kind of part of what you're saying. It's like, we get to this, we have this experience, we have this knowledge, we're wise at this age. And it's like, okay, so how do I use these gifts? And it's like a shift into a whole other chapter of our life.
Yes, and I really feel like the world needs the voices of mature women more than ever today. I mean, look where we are. And, if you have been a nurturer, you're not going to go toward war as your first attempt at solving problems. And women have a different kind of brain. We are better at making connections. We're wired for that and for multitasking and for seeing how everything fits together. And I really feel like we could use that perspective these days. And you're right, if not now, when? I mean, that's certainly the thought that crossed my mind. Yeah. And you start to care a lot less what people are going to think of you and, what you're doing. You just do what needs to be done.
No, I love that. I think that's one of the gifts of age is that you go, I'm old now. You have to listen to me. Or like, I don't really care what you say anymore. I'm just going to do this, because we realize that we're not at the whim of what other people think about us so much.
Right.
That I love. So what are some of the physical things that we can do that can help to, us ease through this whole menopausal time?
Yeah. One of the easiest things I think to do, and I myself find lifestyle change is very challenging, and I think a lot of people do, but this is where much of that is going to fall, is to create a rhythm in your life as you begin to approach middle age. I kind of look at it as a bank account. I mean, your body has certain amount of energy available, and if you have a rhythm going and it knows when you're going to be roughly waking up in the morning, when you are going to need more for your afternoon exercise, or when you're going to be eating, when you're going to go to sleep, it can have the appropriate amount of energy available for you to do that. But if we're random about everything, it has to have a high amount of energy available all the time in order to meet those needs if they happen to come up. So, and just like with a bank account, if you overspend or spend needlessly, you're going to end up really exhausted. So setting a rhythm is very important. Healing the adrenals if you can, which has a lot to do with making sure that your blood sugar stays stable and that you are not fueled by caffeine and adrenaline all the time, because that feels really good. And many of us have lived our lives up till now with that, whether we feel stressed, whether it's good stress or bad stress, to the body, it's all stress. So, to learn to modulate a little bit, prioritize sleep, huge, because, if we're not getting our sleep, our adrenals can't be in good shape, and therefore they can't make the hormones for us that we need, because nature is always going to prioritize survival over reproduction. So we're set up that way. Our hormones can change into each other at need, and that's one of the reasons we're so adaptable. So if we have stress needs, the body sees that as survival. And so it's going to make stress hormones. And if there's not enough raw material to do that, it will literally steal your sex hormones, even if you're low in them, right, to make stress hormones to deal with that. So women's symptoms will be much worse when they're under stress, because the body will be stealing all of that to turn in to meet the stress needs.
Yeah. And well, I'm very fortunate that my partner understands a lot about this. He, his ex-wife went through menopause, and so he did a lot of reading. He's a biologist by nature. So,
oh, great.
Yeah. So he's like, oh, your whole body's recalibrating, and this is what's happening. I'm just like, that sounds really scary. But I seem to be doing okay, because I do keep my stress levels down. But what I also realize is how important it is as a woman to be talking to other women.
Yes.
About what I'm going through, because it's like we are experiencing menopause differently. And I think that we, depending on our bodies and so forth. And like you said, our past programming has a lot to do with that. But opening up that conversation, I think it's a really important part of the journey.
It's not only important, I think it's critical. It's critical for the healing of things that have come before, and for us to have the wherewithal to become the next thing. We need to tell our stories, and we need to be heard. And it's my hope, actually, that women will take this book that I've written and read it in a group of people that they trust, and begin to tell their stories, because all throughout there's a process in the book of self-inquiry where you can check in to see, okay, how did this happen for me? What were things like in my family? What were the messages that I got? How did this develop for me? And if there's someone there to listen, we may think we know the story, but different things come out. And I think it's important that we remember also that we're educating other women. It always struck me when I was still delivering babies that so many of the stories that women would tell other women about their pregnancies were the horror stories. It was never how powerful they felt giving birth or what went right. It was always what was done to them and how the baby almost died. And you see that on television and movies as well. We portray that. And so I can only assume that they still have trauma to work out when we're doing that. But I do think it's part of why women fear menopause, because they've heard we have nowhere to talk to each other. And so they've, heard these pent up stories that are still very fraught with fear and anxiety. So,
or we had mothers that never talked about it.
mm-hmm.
They never shared their experience, and they thought it's something
Right.
that they had to suffer through and grin and bear it kind of situation. But I remember the last conversation I had, I was with some girlfriends at dinner, and we actually got to laugh because, there are parts of the menopausal.
You have to, right?
That are not amazing, like the night sweats and the, we were laughing about how if our partner just puts their finger on us, it's like, we're instantly sweating. And we could laugh about that, but I think that's important that we have a little, light to it as well, and that we have the conversations.
Yes.
Because, when we suffer things alone, I think it's completely unnecessary, and that's part of the purpose of this podcast is to broach subjects like this and go, okay, get your girlfriends together. Let's do this. Let's talk about this. Now, Susan's referenced her book a couple of times. It's called Making Sense of Menopause. And so where can people find the book, Susan? Where can we get hold of it?
It will be coming out on February 15th, and you can get it anywhere. You can pre-order now if you wanted to. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Indie Books, anywhere you get books.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And what was your motivation, and what's the purpose of the book? What are you hoping that the readers get when they actually go through that?
Well, I've worked with women for 45 years now. In the last 20, I've been working exclusively with the menopausal transition. And I really noticed that at this point, it's kind of a fork in the road for women. They either are able to move through and thrive and take on the next part of their life and really find the value and the juice there, or they begin to start to give up and diminish and go away. And so what I wanted to do was write a book that just put menopause in context, and that talked about how one part leads to the next and what this transition is meant to be, what nature has in mind, what are the things that we can do, because there are really powerful women out there bringing this part, their wisdom years, and giving it as a gift to the world. And that doesn't mean you have to be something big, do something big. You can give your gift to your family or to the community, but menopause is really the harvest. It's the juicy fruit when we get to eat it and savor it and then take those seeds and plant them for the next generation. And a big part of this time of life is mentoring those that come behind us. And I think that we can offer a kind of presence to younger people that the generation right above them cannot anymore. I'm older than you are, but the high-speed internet didn't come into play until I was in my 50s. So it was a very different thing. You still connected to people face to face. You still, wrote letters, talked to people. It was a very different thing. And I get very upset these days when I see a small child or a toddler trying to get their mother's attention and the mother's glued to the phone and there's nothing happening. So as women in our wisdom years or as grandmothers, we can give presents to children. We can take them out to build fairy houses or help them connect to the earth, because I think in many ways we're losing our connection to that, and it's important that we keep it.
Yeah, I agree. So Susan, thank you so much for joining us today. If you're listening to the podcast, I encourage you to pre-order the book or order the book, Making Sense of Menopause by Susan Wilson, or go to her website, which is makingsenseofmenopause.com. And there's a whole bunch of, you can access her blogs from there, different webinars and interviews that she's done. And it's a great source of information. And I love how we've just had a very grounded, common sense and optimistic conversation about this time of our life. Because and I love your message that says, we get to choose what our experience is going to be. We're not just at the whim of what's happening to us. We can, navigate that through in a way that's going to be, a better experience. So thank you.
It's a great time of life. There's a lot to be optimistic about. So
Love it.
yeah.
Well, thank you again, Susan.
Thank you. Thank you.